Man, those are some nice trading cards. Gimme! So the last deck I made was about the Final Fantasy scene boxes and how we are getting some pretty neat cards in them. And this time, I wanted to tackle the other half of the Final Fantasy scene box that I talked about, which was the Final Fantasy 1 box. Now, I already covered the scene box that had Destined Warrior, Destined Thief, and of course the Destined White and Black Mages respectively, but there are two other cards that I haven't talked about, and those are Garland, the Royal Kidnapper, and the card that comes with him, the Chaos Shrine's Black Crystal, which is like the first magical object you interact with in Final Fantasy 1. Now, this card alone is a powerhouse, and I have to make a rule with this deck. If you look at the price up top, both of these cards are like $6 and $9. I'm assuming that if you bought the actual scene box, you've got these on hand, so I'm not counting them towards the price of the deck because I don't see a point to that. Most players who have access to these cards have found the scene box and have bought it at their local Walmart, Target, or LGS. But the Chaos Shrine's an interesting card in its own right, because it says if one of our non-token creatures die, we get to exile it and then bring it back onto our board with a finality counter, which seems okay at best. Like, that's a pretty decent way to reanimate a creature and then, you know, get access to it again. It's the fact that it comes with Garland that I think is interesting, because that is what really poses some fun gameplay design choices. Let's talk about those. So today's commander is Garland, the Royal Kidnapper. Now, Garland says that when he enters the battlefield, target opponent becomes the monarch. Now, this is obviously a flavor thing, because Garland steals the princess for the kingdom of wherever the hell you begin with in Final Fantasy 1. I don't remember the name of the location, and I literally just beat the game like 3 months ago. But while granting an opponent monarch is unique for a group hug or slug deck, it's the secondary effects that I find super interesting. You see, Garland then steals a creature from whoever happens to be the monarch at the time, and this creates some fun gameplay scenarios, such as our opponents having to delegate whether or not any one of them wants to yank the monarch from somebody, because that will not only give them back a powerful creature, but it will also allow us to steal from whomever happens to yank the monarch. And, like, if we happen to be the ones that control the monarch, nobody wants to hit us because they don't want to lose their most powerful creature, you know, to us. He's just a very interesting take on the monarch mechanic, honestly. He also gives creatures that you control but do not own +2/+2 and an inability to be sacrificed. This means we can't give monarch to somebody, steal their favorite thing, and then get rid of it with a deadly dispute. While that would be fun, it's not exactly practical with how he's built. But you see, this is where that Chaos Orb comes in. If the Chaos Orb sees one of our creatures die that we controlled, it will reanimate it on our own board, preventing us from losing that creature, even though we technically did end up losing it. So this means that we're going to end up wanting to attack with creatures as often as humanly possible, so we want to build a combat-centric deck to attack with not only our own creatures, but creatures that our opponents own. Now, of course, this isn't the only way to yank things away from the opponent. I've actually added a few cards that work kind of like Chaos Shrine in here in order to let us keep creatures through combat. These also double as ways to protect our own commanders. So Unholy Indenture, Unhallowed Pact, Necrogen Communion, Minions Return, and Kaya's Ghost Form will all perform a similar duty to the Chaos Shrine's Black Crystal, meaning that we are able to not only protect our own things from dying by getting the free revive from Chaos Shrine, but we can put one of these cards on one of our opponent's creatures that we are swinging with, so that if it dies, it will just reanimate back on our board. Also note, for the Chaos Shrine, we are going to be running a single copy of Nesting Grounds. So if we use the Chaos Shrine to reanimate something that we own, we want to hand its finality counter off to some other poor opponent's card. We're also going to run a copy of Nephalia Smuggler. Now, this is a blink creature who's normally pretty decent in his own right, but if you look at the way he's worded, he says that he gives the creature back to you. Whenever he exiles a creature we control, he always gives the creature back to us, meaning that we can just take our opponent's creatures with Garland and then use this guy to blink them, and now we own the creature forever. We can also do this with Ghostly Flicker, which is worded very, very similarly. And since we are a combat-focused deck, let's run a few cards that really force those combats to happen more often. Now, Garland already gives us access to the Monarch, but what if we were also using Risa Rail Kingpin to give us access to the initiative? She can give creatures Death Touch, which makes combat a breeze, but getting access to the initiative means that we can pass that and Monarch around to people, meaning people are far more incentivized to engage in combat against each other. Then we have Arakoa Sneak and Ravenloft Adventurer to do the same thing, with a Tomb of Horrors Adventurer being a free set of copy spells that also gives us initiative. We also want access to the Monarch a little easier in case our commander is not available or we can't steal it back via combat. So Custody Lich is going to help us with that, and he also punishes people whenever we yank the Monarch away. And then we have the Crown of Gondor, which will give us 1/1 for all the creatures that we've stolen throughout the game and all the creatures that we, just own. It's also another way to yank Monarch away from people if we need. But by far the most fleshed out section of the deck is the section that deals with Thievery. We are stealing all kinds of things from our opponents. We've got the basic theft cards like Gaunty Lord of Luxury and Black Cat Cunning Thief, which are, the same cards, just worded a little bit differently. We have cards like Treacherous Urge, which will allow us to steal cards from our opponent's hand, basically. We take one of their creatures, put it into play under our control, then sack it at the end of the turn, and if we sack it at the end of the turn, well, I hope that we have a Chaos Ghost form or a Chaos Shrine or something to let it just, stay on our board forever. We have cards like Extract from Darkness, which allow us to reanimate cards whenever we need from our opponent's grave. We can straight up steal our opponent's creatures with Fealty to the Realm, Fool's Demise, and Mind Flayer, and Domineering Will. Though Domineering Will takes creatures that we're not attacking during a combat, throws them to our board, and then forces them to block, or throws them to anybody's board. But realistically, we're going to put them on our board and then block and let Chaos Shrine let us keep the creatures forever. We have Blatant Thievery to gain control of just any damn thing we want. Control Magic's an older card that steals creatures as well. But then we have cards that let us steal cards when we engage in combat, like Gaunty Night Minister, Nightveil Spectre, and Thief of Sanity. Each of these allows us to exile cards from our opponent's deck and cast them as if they were our own once they get combat damage out on our opponents. And Gaunty specifically lets all of my opponents gain access to this special skill, so more reason for everybody to engage in combat with one another. And then at our top end, we have Sepulchre and Diluvian Primordial, because casting 3 spells from my opponent's graveyard. While stealing cards from our opponents is a form of draw, I still like having raw draw in a deck because theft decks need ways to win games on their own, so being able to get through our own cards is kind of important. So we've got some pretty bog standard stuff in here, like Merfolk Looter, Thought Courier, and Vohar Vidalian Desecrator. All of these are looters that let us sculpt out a hand in case we have any dead draws. Then, because we are going to be so focused on combat, Military Intelligence, Bident of Thassa, Reconnaissance Mission, Waterbender's Ascension, and Coastal Piracy will all draw us cards when we engage in combat. Finally, we have basic draw spells like Factor Fiction and Hostile Negotiations that can be cast at instant speed if we don't need to hold up a counterspell or anything else. Remember that some of our removal pieces are technically thieving cards, but we have a handful of cards that are just straight bog standard removal as well. We first have a super interesting one with Come Back Wrong. Blow up a creature. If it was destroyed this way, return it to the battlefield under our control, then sack it at the beginning of the next end step. If we have access to Chaos Shrine, Ghostly Flicker, Kaya's Ghost Form, Nephalia Smuggler, any of those cards, this card not only kills the thing and steals it temporarily, it kills the thing and steals it forever. Feed the Swarm gets rid of creatures and enchantments. Eldest Reborn makes everybody lose resources and reanimates something from anybody's graveyard. Hostage Taker can yank a artifact or a creature, and then of course lets us cast it. Then we have the trifecta of basic counterspells: Negate to get rid of non-creature stuff, Refute to dig through our deck and counterspells, and Wash Away so we have a 1-mana way to counter commanders. Finally, we have a Drown in the Lock so that we can counter things or destroy cards. It's a bit slow, but it is very, very flexible. Then for our board wipes, we have Necromantic Selection because it can steal cards after wiping a board. It can also yank out commanders due to a fun timing restriction. And we have Oblivion Stone, which can blow up the entire board all at once, which is sometimes really necessary. Now, when I make thief decks, I really like to load them up with a lot of mana, and my reasoning is, not everybody else's mana curve will work in conjunction with ours. So, we are going to be starting off with a pretty big one with Seravok's Tome. Seravok's Tome gives us the initiative, which lets us get a basic land out of the deck and do more stuff. Like I've mentioned before, we can toss the initiative around at people. It's great. But Seravok's Tome specifically gives us access to 2 mana and free spells later on in the game, which is great. Then we have the 2-mana mana rocks, the basic gold standard for casual mana in Magic the Gathering. We have Sky Diamond, we have Charcoal Diamond. Both these come into play tapped, but they're still pretty good. Then we have Solar Transformer, Prismatic Lens, Planar Atlas, which can help sculpt our early game land drops, Arcane Signet, Guardian Idol, and Mind Stone. All of these are very, very decent at what they do. They're basic 2-mana rocks that do not cost us a ton and just do what they need to do. We're also going to run a Wayfarer's Bauble because the easiest way to protect ourselves when it comes to ramping is getting out lands because they are less likely to get destroyed, and then an Honored Heirloom so that we have ways to get rid of problematic cards in graveyards in case we put them there, and we want the reanimation player to know that we're the only ones allowed to reanimate. Then for the lands, we're running 7 basic islands and 10 basic swamps with a bunch of dual lands. The tapped Temple of Deceit and Fetid Pools, the temple so that early game we can get access to the scry, and the pools so that late game we don't end up getting screwed over too terribly badly because we can cycle it away. Path of Ancestry also gives us a scry with our commander, which is nice, but then we have the untapped lands of Darkwater Catacombs, Exotic Orchard, Choked Estuary, Command Tower, Tainted Isle, Sunken Hollow, and River of Tears. For our fetching lands, we have a Myriad Landscape to help us ramp, and Ash Barren so that we can get it out early and throw it away for a basic land or get it in our hand late and it won't hurt us, and then Vibrant Cityscape, Escape Tunnel, Evolving Wilds, and Terramorphic Expanse, which are all basically the same card. And then finally, utility lands. I mentioned that we had Nesting Ground in here, and it's a way to easily move counters around, like the finality counters that normally would hurt us, but we also are a combat deck, so we need access to Rogue's Passage. We might throw things we don't want to deal with in graveyards, so we have Pit of Offerings to take care of that, Port of Carfell to reanimate our own cards, and Throne of the High City so that we can become the Monarch whenever we damn well please. And that does it for everything in the deck. All that's left now is to talk about how to play it. As with any time we're playing a Thief deck, remember, we don't really have access to our opponent's hypothetical cards, so we just have to assume that they are some generically good creature or spell, and hope for the best. That said, let's look at our opening hand and see what we have. A removal spell in case we need it, Gaunty to start the thiefing early, Fractured Power Stone, Sky Diamond, Wayfarer's Bauble, and 2 lands. Now, I would prefer one of these, one of these ramp cards to be a land card, but it's not the worst thing in the world. I'm willing to start with the hand, so let's see what we can get as we open up. We did get that extra land. That's good. Let's go ahead and tap it for Wayfarer's Bauble, and then move to the next turn. Next turn sees us getting another land. We're already getting a little flooded, so let's go ahead and stop that from being a problem late game. Let's go ahead and go to the deck, yank out a swamp, thinning the deck out ever so slightly to see if we can't change our luck. We end up drawing another land. Not super grand, not the biggest fan of that, but we can go ahead and use this to steal a card from one of our opponents, and then boom, we have disrupted an opponent's strategy. Not the most simple way of doing it, but it does do the job. And then we can move on to our next turn. Moving into turn 4, we draw Black Cat, who is, again, just stronger Gaunty. And here's where I have to make a weird decision. I want to play Black Cat because it's on curve, but I think the stronger move is playing Fractured Power Stone and then playing Gaunty because it gives us access to land ramp on top of the move. Now we've stolen 2 things from our opponents, and we have the ability to attack with the creature we stole with Garland. Remember that creatures stolen with Garland will not actually have haste, so you will not be able to swing with them the turn you yank them. Moving into the next turn, we draw an Honored Heirloom, and I think this is where we go ahead and play that Sky Diamond, get it out of the way, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's Black Cat. I want to steal something from another opponent. Turn 6 sees us drawing a Prismatic Lens, which we can go ahead and play, and then we can go ahead and play the Honored Heirloom, and now we've got 4 mana to cast any of the 3 spells we've yanked out with Black Cat or Gaunty. In an ideal world, we've been able to steal at least a draw spell from one of our opponents. That's kind of what would dig us out of this, but we have no way to guarantee that that's what we took, so we have to just operate under the assumption that we've taken a couple okay creatures. Moving into the next turn, we have a Treacherous Urge, which we can use to yank a creature away from one of our opponents. and now it is ours for the taking. We can also use Feed the Swarm to get rid of a problematic card on the board, and now we are completely spent on resources, relying on, again, hopefully the cards that were stolen from Gonti and from Black Cat. Moving into turn 8, the final card is a Control Magic, which does give us access to another stealing card, which is great and does a lot of good for us. But again, without knowledge of the cards taken from Black Cat or Gonti, we could be super ahead right now and not know it. We have no way of knowing that information unless our opponents had draw spells or otherwise in their cards we stole. We did get to dig 13 cards deep between our opponents, so the likelihood of us hitting a draw spell is high. I'd still consider this a pretty decent win because we have all the mana we need to cast our opponent's spells, and we've stolen 3 creatures at minimum, not counting stuff that could have been yanked from the Monarch, not counting the ability to take the Monarch away from the opponent who we stole the creature from. You can make the political decision with that opponent to hit them and then give them their creature back in exchange for you gaining the Monarch. Sometimes people will just take that, without any problem whatsoever. So who knows? Maybe we're in hot water right now. Maybe we're actually 4 or 5 cards ahead. Because it's a thief deck, this is simply information we cannot know. Now, speaking of draw cards, if you are upgrading this deck, one of the strongest draw cards you can have access to is the Staff of Eden. Drawing a card for every permanent we control but do not own is absolutely massive. You can also sculpt the ramp package in this deck to include a Darkness Crystal, which can steal cards while also being a ramp spell. Conjurer's Closet can keep our cards on our board even if we did not own them, because Conjurer's Closet is worded the same way as Ghostly Flicker. Blink the thing and put it back onto the field under our control. Mocking Doppelganger can become a copy of anything that we need, and it can also goad creatures, which helps with the forcing combat sub-theme of our deck. Agent of Treachery can also yank creatures, which is pretty good. Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots might be necessary to make sure that the creatures we steal can swing the turn they get stolen. You can also put in the Courts, Court of Ambition, Vantress, Locthwain. All of these give you access to some excellent extra effects while giving you more ways to control the Monarch ability. Breach the Multiverse can steal 4 creatures all at once while milling a ton of cards, and Rev Tithe Extractor is a more expensive, far sexier, and borderline identical version of Gonti, though it only works for our own creatures. So ideally, it's maybe a little stronger than Gonti in that it's asymmetric, but maybe you think it's not as strong as Gonti because it's not helping with the forced combat sub-theme that the deck is going for. Who knows? In either case, Rev is great, she is wonderful, and I think you will enjoy playing her. That said, that does it for everything here, and I am feeling the melatonin gummies kick in way harder than they needed to. I've actually done most of this with my eyes closed because keeping them open feels like an actual struggle, and I don't know why. So I'll go ahead and go through my usual spiel. If you like Commander decks that dominate tables without dominating your wallet, that is my focus. Subscribe if you haven't already. Tell a couple friends what I'm doing over here if you think that there's some value to it. And if you want to pick up this deck, there will be a link in the description, not only to the Moxfield list, but to Mana Pool, where you can pick up this deck and anything else you might need. There's a tiny URL link there where you can get the deck specifically. If you've never used Mana Pool before, then it does end up costing you less the first time because you'll get a $5 off coupon for supporting me. If you've already used Mana Pool before, it still supports me in the channel, so thank you very, very much. That said, I am going to go pass out. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you all in the next one. I've made the unfortunate mistake of making all fan art canon, and you guys used that to make a ton of doppelgangers of me that try to ruin my life. So why not go ahead and celebrate that cacophony by picking up the new channel playmat over on 4th Wall.